welcome to the Pig and Whistle Tales from Azeroth. As always, here at the Pig and Whistle Inn in Stormwind, I go through a variety of subjects with regards to World of Warcraft. So grab a bottle or a pint, sit back and enjoy. Today's subject, we're going to be going over guilds mainly, and this is sort of going over guilds mainly in WoW Classic, WoW Tbc as it's now known. And there can be some retail variations, obviously, but it is more the sort of classic side of guilds that I want to look at, share my experiences with you guys, etc. So, without further ado, let's get into it. But we are going to start off with the weekly stuff as always. So the mythics this week are Raging, Tyrannical and Quaking. So Tyrannical is the boss health, obviously. Raging is when mobs get to a certain threshold of HP, their damage is increased by 100%, so definitely burst through them as quickly as possible. And Quaking is basically a small ring around you every 15 seconds. If anyone's in that ring, you deal damage to them, and it also interrupts spell casting when it erupts, so make sure that you aren't casting anything in that time. The quests, the dungeon quests for this week are Theatre of Pain and Spies of Ascension, so make sure you pick them up for your extra anima gains. The world boss for this week is located in Bastion. It is Valinor, the Light of Eons. So 250 anima, some possible gear, conduits, stuff like that. Make sure you don't miss out on that world boss this week. And the event for this week is Pet Battles. And so the XP that you gain from pet battles is tripled during the course of the week. So that is the weekly stuff out of the way. Very nice and simple. It's nothing really special going on. Obviously, the big news is the fact that Tbc Pre-Patch has hit. So I want to make a separate podcast, which will probably be next week's podcast, about my initial thoughts on it, stuff that's happened, because having sort of only a day to look at stuff on the pre-patch doesn't really give me enough information as to what I want to talk to you guys about with it. So I'm going to give it sort of a weekish and then, go from there with that podcast. So definitely keep an eye out for next week's podcast, because it will be good. A nice little TBC episode. And we will be moving into the more TBC orientated stuff in the coming weeks, with that being the talk of the town and still no 9.1 patch on the horizon, or that we have been given a date for yet. So definitely keep an eye out for next week and the weeks to come for TBC stuff. But we're going to be starting off with something very simple. It's something that I've not actually gone through before, I don't believe. And it's guilds. So what they offer and what they demand. Is it sort of a good trade-off? Is it a good give and take? Stuff like that. So obviously guilds, you can find a huge variety of guilds. You've got your raiding guilds, you've got your PvP guilds, your RP guilds, filler guilds, stuff like that. I want to start with the raiding guilds. And I'm going to use Classic as a sort of baseline here, because obviously in retail and Classic it's completely different things, I'd say, guild-wise. Or I would say they're similar in terms of concept, raiding guilds, but they're very different in many ways, mainly due to sort of the numbers that you need and sort of the requirements, etc. But we're going to get into that. So, raiding guilds. Obviously, raiding guilds are a massive part of WoW. Raiding is the end game of WoW. It was the original end game of World of Warcraft. In WoW Classic, raiding is kind of the only end game. You could PvP for fun, for ranking purposes, but if you're doing it for ranking, there's only so much you can do until you've hit the top rank. After that, there's nothing. For fun purposes, obviously you can do it as many times, but having only 3 battlegrounds can get very tedious sometimes, and there's only so much that you can see and do in terms of PvP with the spells that are available, with the different situations you might find yourself in, compared to, say, like retail. In an arena, there can be many different situations that you come across, and you can do it, and you can figure out a solution to all of them situations in a different way. But with classic PvP, it's very much... You've seen the same thing a load of times, and you know what to do, and if there's something that you just can't do, you can't do. It happens. But in retail, it's completely different. So, raiding guilds. These are a main staple point of Classic. This was the main highlight for everyone in Classic, completing raids, completing every sort of raid tier, so Molten Core, then Blackwing Lair, Anchorage, and then finally the Naxxramas raid, which came out in Phase 6 of WoW Classic. And raiding guilds are really good. They're really good. They bring a massive community that you can sort of chill out with, you can socialise with, you can game with, you can have fun with, you can complete, achievements together in the game, completing like your first Naxxramas run, completing your first full cleared Naxxramas, stuff like that. There's many different things that you can achieve within a raiding guild and the people with it. Now, obviously with raiding guilds, you need in Classic a lot of people. So 40 minimum, and these are 40 people that are going to turn up for a raid, that are going to be, pulling their own weight. It's not going to be any people, just slouching behind, not doing anything, that kind of thing. So you've got a massive community with your raiding guilds within WoW Classic. And this can cause some dramas, this can cause some friendships, this can cause absolute chaos, this can cause many things. But we're going to be looking at that in a bit. The main thing that raiding guilds want for this sort of community that they give you is a schedule for your raids. Obviously, you wish to, participate in raids if you're in a raiding guild. You might not want to, you might just want the community aspect of it, as raiding guilds do obviously have the social aspect of it as well, because of the amount of members that they have within the guild to accommodate that. But if you're looking to raid in a raiding guild, there's certain demands that they want of you when it was Classic, and it might be soon to be TBC. It might be the same, but I imagine it'll be a little bit less intense and nerve-wracking when looking to raid in TBC. This is mainly due to the world buff meta, and I'll give a small description of the world buff meta. It's basically, within WoW Classic, there were world buffs that you can get. These are buffs that no player could just do on a button, like Arcane Intellect for a mage, Power Ward Fortitude for priest, Divine Spirit for a priest, Battle Shout for a warrior, that kind of thing. These were buffs that were required in the open world of WoW. So Onyxia Head is a world buff. This dropped for everyone in Stormwind when they handed in a raid item called the Head of Onyxia or the Head of Nefarian. They got the Oni buff, and this is a 2-hour buff that would, give a massive amount of attack power, some crit chance, that kind of thing. You've got the Daimal buffs, which are very good in their own right, 15% increased health, some crit chance and some attack power. You have these ZG buff, Zoggarub buff, which is the Heart of Hakar turn-in, which again you get in the raid from the boss Hakar. So all of these world buffs would make your character really good, like insanely good. Think of it this way: you have all of your potions on and elixirs and stuff. You have about, as a mage, I had oil, wizard oil, I had my fire elixir, arcane elixir. They were the 3 main ones that would probably accommodate to something like a ZG buff, something like that. So having 5 of these buffs would be really good. And these are the 5 sort of main ones. Obviously, you can get Songflower and Dark Moonfair, but they were very sort of out of the way, and obviously Dark Moon Fair only came around once every couple weeks, so very tough to, get hold of that one when it's not up. So these world buffs were very, very potent in your DPS output in raids, and with Naxxramas, some guilds just wanted the requirement there to get these world buffs, to get every single world buff, and the way that this made it sort of intense and nerve-wracking was some of these world buffs can be dispelled by other players. So by a priest walking up and pressing dispel, them world buffs that are really good are just gone. So Onyxia head couldn't be dispelled as well as the Zul'Gurub buff. But everything else, the Dark Moon Fair maybe, the Songflower and the 3 Diamel ones, they all could be dispelled. And these were some that you really had to go out of your way to get, because they were on the opposite sort of continent most of the time. And in a dungeon, you had to complete a certain task within a dungeon to unlock these world buffs and to acquire them. So you'd spend about 10-15 minutes travelling to this dungeon, 5 minutes running through the dungeon that was complete, because you'd usually have a cleared Diamel run to get these Diamel buffs. So run through the dungeon for 5 minutes, run back through talking to the guards, get a portal to Stormwind, and you log out there or whatever. It would take you about half hour, to get these buffs, all in all. So they weren't anything to sort of, go over. I've forgotten the word for it. To sort of, scoff at. There we go. They're the words. But these world buffs were demanded by guilds sometimes. My guild personally, or my old guild, my former guild, they weren't sort of hard on anyone for not getting the world buffs. Obviously, world buffs were encouraged by my guild because it made runs a lot smoother. And I think this is the best way to go about it, because if you're sort of pushed to get the world buffs, you kind of feel like it's a job at the end of the day instead of a game. And for me personally, some people might like it, but for me personally, it didn't make the game fun. And I used to get world buffs. I really did. And I got dispelled once, and I was like, there's no point putting in that effort just for someone who's wanting to ruin your day, sort of just annoys you a little bit by dispelling your buff. So I thought it's not really worth the effort to get these buffs, and I'll just stick with my Onyxia and Zul'Gurub ones, the ones that can't be dispelled, that kind of thing. So my guild were very much a little bit lenient on world buffs. We popped an Oni head and a ZG before raid, but if you wanted to get the others, they were very much optional. And like I said, in classic raiding guilds, some really did just demand them. Some were like, you basically can't go to raid unless you have all of these buffs. And that is, I think it's a bit bonkers, to be honest, because you're telling people, unless they really like raiding and sort of, pumping through the raid, like, you're telling them to do this in their sort of spare time within the game that they're paying their sub for, this is what they've got to do on this day or before next week in order to partake in this raid. And it seems like homework to me a bit, not gonna lie. I can understand why you would want world buffs, because again it makes it very easy to go through the raid, but for me it just seems a lot more of a ball ache more than anything. But some raiding guilds did require it, and some got really sort of aggravated if you didn't provide them. There's some GDKP runs or servers that I'm in. These GDKP are basically where people bid on the item, and the gold that has amassed from all of the buyers and stuff is split among the amount of raiders that were in that raid. So obviously for Molten Core GDKP, you don't necessarily need world buffs or even consumables at all now, because Molten Core is quite easy. in a sense, with the sort of gear that most people have and stuff like that. But I'm in a Nax Ramus GDKP. They require you to have every world buff, including Songflower, which is insane. Dark Moonfell, obviously, if it's up, but they want Songflower to be a mandatory buff. And that is insane to me, because it's not fun, in my personal opinion. It's just not fun running around and picking up buffs. I mean, I could be doing something else. I could be PvPing. I could be, farming some gold for TBC. I could be doing whatever. Instead, I'm picking up this flower to get an hour buff so that I can, have a 3% increased crit chance in a raid. And it's not necessarily the greatest thing, or you don't feel rewarded for it, I don't think, anyway. The effort that you get for the reward is not worth it, in my honest opinion. But raiding guilds did demand it, and, it depends on how serious you wanted to take raiding, in all honesty. The next thing a raiding guild sort of wants you to do is go by a certain schedule. So obviously, getting 40 people together is going to be tough as it is. I mean, getting 5 people together is really tough, because everyone's got their own schedule, everyone's doing something at different times, etc. So no matter what, there is a raiding guild out there that has always had someone that goes, yeah, that time doesn't work for me. And that's the person that's kind of the most annoying to deal with, because it's like, okay, it might not work with you, but we still have to accommodate 39 other people, like in WoW Classic, to raid with. And if we accommodate it for you, suddenly 15 people can't turn up, or 20 people, or even 5 people, or even someone else can't turn up. It depends on pretty much what would be the best time for the majority, because unfortunately the majority in a raiding guild in Classic is going to take precedence over one person within a raiding guild, unless it's probably your guild leader, in which case he's probably doing the schedule. So they want you to commit to a certain schedule, and my previous guild, the one that I raided with, we raided at 4:45. That is my time, so BST. So it's 4:45 server time. And pretty much that was fine for me throughout the entirety of Classic. There were some that couldn't make it, but for the majority it was the perfect time. It was the easiest time because it wasn't too early, wasn't too late. You could get stuff done beforehand, you could get stuff done just after, because our raids usually weren't the longest unless we were progressing some current content. Like Nax Ramas took 4 hours and stuff, and we got like halfway through. We took it very slow at the start with raids, so we gradually got faster and faster. I think it was about 2 hours 20 or something, like our Nax Ramas in the end. So you could obviously do stuff after, when it was like 6 o'clock or something like that. So obviously they want you to commit to a certain schedule, and you've kind of got to be flexible if you're looking to raid and be quite active within that raiding scene or that raiding community. And this is sort of what is demanded of you. You've got to be a little bit flexible when it comes to the raids. Not sure how it's going to work in TBC, because obviously it gets, put down a little bit more in terms of raid size from 40 to 25. So it might be a bit more flexible in terms of, okay, we might just move the raid to this date or something like that. Can everyone do it and stuff like that? So the schedule is very volatile, I would say, in TBC most likely, but there was a set schedule for my previous guild anyway, but they really want you to commit to that one schedule. And finally, you've got rosters within sort of raiding guilds within Classic. So you're looking at sort of team composition of 49, because obviously if you bring, 12 priests to heal, suddenly you don't want to bring any more healers, because you don't want more than 12 healers usually. You want about sort of 12. Then you're not bringing a resto druid for a buff. You're not bringing paladins for their blessings, or shamans if you're horde. You're not bringing like other healing classes that provide other sort of utility. Priests are great at like AoE healing with Prayer of Healing, but for sort of a longevity fight, you might be looking at paladins instead, mainly because every time they crit, they get their mana back from that spell. So if you're looking at sort of healing over time effects on, say, like the Maitsna fight in Naxxramas, you're looking at sort of a druid healer that might be very useful. You put some heals over time on them, you put abolish poison on your tank, and everyone gets web wrapped, and your tank is sort of there alone. But them heals over time, really help out in that situation. So again, you have to be very flexible with the rosters. Even though there's 40 people, 40 slots within this roster, there is always going to be some people that are left out. You might have a roster of 45 and 5 people on the bench, as we called it, ready to be brought in if no one showed up, if someone had something that came up, if no one was ready, if anything really. But you're always going to have someone that might not be there. You're always going to have someone who's going to be late. You're always going to have someone who's on the bench ready. You're going to have someone who's annoyed that they're on the bench. You can have many different things, but you have to be aware that you might not be on the roster each and every week. Now, obviously, if you've got a very solid position within your guild, more chances of you being in that roster, or there's more chance of you being in that roster, which is great. But we tried a rotation system, and we felt kind of bad that some people who signed up week in, week out didn't necessarily get in the raid. So we voluntarily, sat out for a week if we didn't necessarily need loot, as we loot cancelled a lot of the pieces of gear. We just saw who wanted to sit out for a week and let others sort of, jump in for a week so that they get to experience, the raid and stuff like that. So rosters are always ongoing, they're always on changing, and there's not really a set roster, as it were. You're obviously going to have a main core, but for the most part, raiding guilds do have to deal with rosters and, people being upset that they're not on a roster, or that this person's got on a roster and they didn't want them there, that kind of thing. So they're the sort of main points of raiding guilds. That's sort of what they demand, at least in Classic anyway. They demand sort of world buffs, a tight schedule. You want to be on the roster, you got to keep an eye out, you got to do your part, really. They do offer a lot, though, raiding guilds, because especially in Classic, as you've got 40 people in a raid, you've got 40 people in a guild right there, 40 people that are active, 40 people that are talking constantly. You have a small community, and then plus you've got the social aspect of the raiding guild, where there's just more alts, there's loads of other people who don't necessarily raid but just chill out within the guild. So they do offer a lot for just casual players as well. Moving on to sort of PvP guilds, I imagine this will become a lot more of a staple within TBC, mainly because PvP guilds are tough to come by in Classic because there's no PvP, or not as much. There is only the battlegrounds, and there is arenas coming to TBC Classic. Basically, all you have is rated battlegrounds, which are obviously on retail and arenas. So I can't imagine a guild at the moment, on my server anyway, has made a PvP only guild. There's been loads of funny guilds. There's an only Draenei guild that's obviously been made. That was made 2 days ago when the Draenei were released. So I'm kind of curious just to see how many members are in that, and sort of how serious it is, if it's a sort of joking matter, that kind of thing. Obviously, they're good fun. PvP guilds, I don't think they really exist on my server. I imagine there might be one that gives it a go, and sort of you ask people within PvP guilds to just sort of do PvP activities, obviously. Battlegrounds, arenas, anything like that. They don't really offer they're not as strict on things like raiding guilds are with world bus schedules and rosters and stuff like that. PvP guilds are obviously a lot more flexible because you can log on. You can be like, hey, who wants to do a battleground? And loads of people will be like, yeah, sure. Or who wants to do an arena? Like, yeah, sure, I'll do like a couple skirmishes. I want to do some rated ones. Okay, add me to your team, that kind of thing. So they're a lot more flexible. They do offer like a community, but this community is a lot smaller, mainly because raiding guilds are obviously looking for a lot of numbers to fill that roster, whereas PvP guilds, you don't necessarily rely on rosters or schedules or anything like that. You just rely on the people who are playing to be sort of more active, and if they aren't, then you sort of look to replace them, that kind of thing. So PvP guilds, for me, are a lot more fluent. They don't demand as much, but they don't offer as much of a community, which can be either a very good thing or a very bad thing, depending on your viewpoint. I mainly see it as a good thing. Now, I see this as a good thing because the chance of you finding people that are less, tough against how you feel about things is less so. So you've got more chance of finding people who piss you off in a raiding guild because of the amount of number of people compared to a PvP guild compared to the amount of number of people. So there's obviously that trade-off. But if you like a massive community, then obviously a raiding guild or something is the way to go. PvP guild, a lot more chilled, less demanding, that kind of thing. It does offer a little bit less of a community, but I feel as if that community is a lot more tighter and sort of closer together because of that, like, smaller community. RP guilds are a thing, and they're not necessarily big on community. They're very small, I'd actually say. They're not the biggest guilds. They're not the sort of boldest guilds. You barely see them. That's the thing. But they are there. They're, I would say, obviously this varies so much, but on my server, I'd say it's about 50 people per guild. Like for the RP guilds, obviously they all intertwine and they're kind of all one big guild, as it were. Obviously, you've got guilds that sort of mesh with other guilds and, do RP events with other guilds and stuff like that. So it can turn into a bigger community. I think in terms of the community, to be honest, RP guilds have the best sort of community because everyone has the same agenda. Like, raiding guilds and PvP guilds obviously have the same agenda, but these are people who RP to have some fun. These are people who collaborate with each other outside of their own guild so they can make friends from other guilds and stuff to rely on if, say, they don't like someone in their current guild, stuff like that. So I would say that the community within the RP guilds is actually a lot better than probably most other guilds. That's the thing. I don't like RP myself. I find it sort of boring, and because I need to be doing something, I very much like the PvP side of World of Warcraft. I can see the idea and the love I can see the idea and why people love RP, because it is a role-playing game. You make this character, you give it a backstory, you have certain professions that you want to do with this character, that kind of thing, and you make this character come to life almost. And I can understand that and respect that. But not for me, firstly. But I do think that the community for RP guilds is very good. I think that they're very formal, to be honest. I sort of see them as quite posh guilds, to be honest. I sort of see them in that manner. And I think that the community in that guild will be one of the best that they can offer. And they demand very little. Obviously, I would imagine that they demand a lot of respect in their guild, mainly for people who create these characters, their own characters. And I imagine that they want other people to respect their character as they are creating it almost. So I might be John the blacksmith who has 2 kids but is divorced, and someone might be like, yeah, but you can't be divorced or something like that. And it's like, that is my character and I'm making that choice, but you've just, like, it's not your character. Like, you can do this for your character, that's fine. But I think that RP guilds really demand a lot of respect from each other. And that's why I think the community can be so good, because they won't necessarily be, mean or aggressive to each other, that kind of thing. Now, there is one more guild sort of category here, and it's called a filler guild, or a leveling guild, some people might know it as. Now, a filler guild, as I like to call it, or leveling guild, is one that's too big for my liking. So these are the guilds where you've made a level 1 character, and you've logged in, you've played for 5 minutes, and you get a whisper. And this whisper is something along the lines of, hello, your character name here, I'm their character name from the guild, their guild name. We see that you have no guild, and we would love for you to join our ranks, or something along that lines. It's an automated message picked up by an add-on, pretty much. So there's no sort of community within these guilds, I feel like. It's everyone just been thrown into a mixer, just a level, just to see something, scrolling up in the chat while you're leveling. And then when you get to a certain level, you quit and look for what you want within the game. A PvP guild, an RP guild, a raiding guild. Don't get me wrong, filler guilds are good in a sense, because it gives you a starting point to go on from, if that makes any sense. Like, you kind of know what you would want from that filler guild, and it's just something to interact. You might pick up 1 or 2 friends from that guild and move on and bring them with you. You might stay in that guild. You might decide that you like just seeing a load of text from like 999 members or something. I think it offers a good sense of community within the server, but in terms of a community within the guild, I don't think that there is much of one compared to the other 3 sort of categories, the PvP, the raiding and the RP. I think they all have a common interest, whereas the filler guild is obviously the 3 guilds listed above, but just all in one. It's sort of a mix and match, and then they're sort of spread out into their own, category. The raiding guild, they go to the PvP guild, RP guild, etc. Now, obviously, each guild is completely different. Each guild has its own benefits, has its own sort of, I've forgotten the word for the opposite of benefits. Oh my god. Negative impacts on people. That, you get what I mean. It has its own benefits and negative ideals. And with I'm going to give you an example. My perfect guild is a guild that can be very flexible. So it's not a PvP guild, it's not a raiding guild, it's something in between that. It's kind of both, in a sense, with a little bit of RP like mixed into it. This is like the perfect guild that I'm thinking, for myself anyway. So obviously, if I want to do a couple dungeons, I'm sure people within the raiding guilds would want to be up for that, like PvE stuff. If people want to do some battlegrounds, yeah, sure, sign me up. I can just log on, ask some people if they want to do battlegrounds, and they'll be up for it. If I like the RP guild sort of section I want in this is the respect, almost. So everyone respects each other within the guild. They respect what they're doing at the time. It's not like, oh my god, why are you doing that? That's stupid and boring. It's like, oh, okay, good luck with your Stratholm run, or good luck in the Warsong Gulch that you were doing, that kind of thing. It's not like, oh, Warsong Gulch is boring, why are you even doing that? So my perfect guild is all 3 of these mixed in, with a smallish community. Mainly because the smaller community, I feel like, is a lot more of family orientated almost. So you get to know everyone a lot more personally, rather than you have 200 members, 40 of which do a raid, and 5% of their life, compared to, say, like a smaller guild, the one that I've mentioned, where it's got, 50 members, and about the 40% of someone's life. Sort of what job they have, their name, when they sort of come online, and you can play around with that. You can set up sort of dungeon runs, battlegrounds around that sort of time to accommodate them, which makes it a lot more friendly, a lot more enjoyable. The environment's a lot more calm and collected, I feel. Now, I've been in a raiding guild throughout the entirety of Classic. It was a good guild. It was a very good guild. But recently I've found out that I don't necessarily vibe with the guild. And this is mainly because of how big the community is. And with a bigger community, there is a lot more chance of people that I don't agree with on a very personal level, on a ideological, that doesn't sound right, idea level. Oh my god, I can't think of the words. I don't connect with them at all. I bash heads with them a lot. That's the best way to put it. And this obviously is going to happen in a bigger community. This is why I prefer the smaller one. But I have recently decided to leave my current or my old raiding guild, which was a massive guild, massive step, because I've been with them since the very start of Classic, and I moved to a smaller guild. Obviously, I know the people within that smaller guild still. I've talked to them at least every week at the bare minimum. I know them. I know their names. I know them a lot more than I did my old guildies, which is ridiculous because I knew my old guildies for a year and a half or 2 years soon, and I known these people for a couple months, that kind of thing. So it's very weird how that sort of works out, but that's my sort of take on my perfect guild. Obviously, everyone has their own sort of idea for their perfect guild, but it's about finding that right guild for you. And at the moment, with Pre-Patch and TBC coming out beginning of June, now is the time, if you wish to find that perfect guild, to do so. If you want to switch from a RP guild and you want to really try and get into raiding, you might want to look towards a raiding guild. If you want to just chill out, you don't want to raid anymore, you want to look towards sort of an RP guild or just sort of a smaller guild in general, then you might drop out of your raiding guild and you might go into sort of a smaller guild as I did, just for the community purposes. So now is the best time to look towards other things and change what it is that or find out what it is that you want within TBC and go with it. Because once you're in TBC, it'll be a lot tougher to sort of chop and change. This is the time to sort of look towards it with the I want to say new expansion, TBC, coming out, even though obviously TBC is an old expansion. But guilds are very complex in terms of what you want out of them, what they demand, what they can provide, what they can do to sort of implode themselves almost sometimes. There's many different things that guilds can do to upset you, make you happy, stuff like that. So just make sure that you find a good guild, or no guild at all. If you'd rather just play completely alone, hey, you do you. It's completely your choice. But guilds do offer a lot for you in terms of the community within Classic, even within retail. It's nice to have guildies to fall back on if something's not happening within WoW on that day. If you need some help on that day within WoW, you can always turn to some guildies. But this is a bit of a weird one. I'm not too sure where I was going to take this, I'm not going to lie. I wanted to just talk about my personal experience with guilds, but the sort of system with raiding guilds, PvP guilds and RP guilds, it's quite interesting because obviously there's so many different types and things that are incorporated within guilds. But thank you all very much for listening, as always. I really do appreciate it. Definitely keep an eye out for next week, though, because it's most likely going to be a TBC episode, or a pre-patch episode, sorry, and it's always good to keep an eye out. For those who are on Patreon, definitely keep an eye out this week for the Patreon podcast. It's going to be all about the Arcane Mage this week, so definitely keep an eye out. Sorry if you just heard a crow or a bird. That's really loud outside that window. But thank you all very much for listening, and go with Valor, friend. Goodbye all.